Okay. Hi, my name is Grace Warner, and my presentation this week is about artificial intelligence and how it's going to affect our classrooms. And specifically, we're going to talk about different classrooms and how it affects different groups. So let's first talk about, though, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're thinking about it in the form of a technology trend. So we're going to talk about first off, what is a technology trend? And then we're going to evaluate whether artificial intelligence is that type of trend. And then we're going to go in deeper about what artificial intelligence is and how it could be used in both for positives and negatives inside of our classrooms. Okay, so first things first, when we talk about trends, I want you to think about, back, I don't know, when we were growing up. So I grew up in the early 2000s. So some of the trends that were there, we had the low-hanging jeans, and we had Beanie Babies and random things like that. That was a trend. That is something that comes and goes. When we think about technology, we're going to think more about trends as in something that is coming, is up and new, and it's brand new. We're thinking about things maybe like gaming, and thinking about things like artificial intelligence, and then also just thinking about how these brand new items are coming into our world and how it's going to change what's going on, whether that's for good or for bad. But what a trend really is, it's whenever we take something and it's following a general direction. Okay, so it's following that general course. Mathematically, we would look at that on a graph and we'd say, okay, so if we looked at the ticks on here, it's typically going in a primary positive trend. And that's really what that means. It's following one main general course. And that's what that means to be a trend. That technology, though, then we think about what a technology trend is. That's the same idea, is something that's coming and it's going to be following that general direction. We're going to be following that general course. And in this case, we're going to be evaluating whether or not this trend is a positive or negative one, both kind of, and talk about it. So when we ask ourselves about artificial intelligence itself, and really bringing it very specific here, we're going to talk more about ChatGPT and how we use that. Okay, if we're asking ourselves first, is this a technology trend and why? So one thing that we would say is yes and no to that question. I would say yes, it is a technology trend because it is here and it's most likely not going away. But also at the same time, when we think about trends in general, trends are things that come and go. And so because of that, artificial intelligence may not be a trend just because it's here permanently. There's most likely nothing we can do to stop it at this point. It has taken off. And so in terms of the idea of a trend coming and going, it's not. But whenever we think about technology itself and how AI has become so ingrained in our lives, yes, it is a technology trend. So the second thing on this list right here is something called GoCSD. And when I'm talking about that, it's called the Greater Ozarks Cooperating School Districts. And what that means is that mainly the southern half of Missouri, they get together every year and they talk about different trends, different things that are going on. And it's basically a gigantic conference for teachers. So, and I've gone for every year that I've taught, so I've gone for the last 2 years. I'm going again this year. But last year, our keynote speaker, while we were there down, it's actually in Branson, and while we were there, talked a lot about ChatGPT and talked a lot about artificial intelligence. One of the things that it was telling us was that artificial intelligence, it's already here. So back in August, before ChatGPT even launched, it was here. Okay, it was in the form of when you go to Google something and it already knows what your brain is thinking, that's artificial intelligence. Whenever you're saying things on the phone and when you're thinking about it, and then all of a sudden you look up on Amazon and Amazon already knows what you're thinking about, that's a version of artificial intelligence. And it's something that we've been using already. Another great example of this is when you open up your email account and you go to start writing a parent email, and then it starts filling in words for you. That's another version of artificial intelligence. And so when I was at GoCSD last year, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about these new levels of artificial intelligence and what that's going to look like. So originally, we've had with our technology trends and with artificial intelligence, the first wave of that was always giving us say one word. So think about autocorrect in your phone. That would be an example of that. But then the second wave, the second generation of that artificial intelligence that came about, that was whenever we had those emails and they could fill in a sentence. But now we're at the third generation, which is where we are at currently. And that's ChatGPT, able to write an entire school paper for you. And I'll actually show you a little bit about how that works later and show you how to write a prompt. But that's what that looks like. And that's kind of what we talked about last year. So, anyways, let's go to the next one. Okay, so ChatGPT, whenever we talk about this, it is actually the fastest growing consumer application in history. This is an article that came from Forbes. In fact, it was published on February 2nd, 2023. So this came out in February. And as of February, it was the fastest growing consumer application in history. According to that research that announced, in 20 years following the internet space, so whenever the internet came out, we cannot recall a faster ramp in a consumer internet app. So to compare a little bit, TikTok took 9 months to reach 100 million users, and Instagram about 2.5 years. And by the time this article had been written, it had already reached at least 1 million people that had downloaded and was using ChatGPT as an application. So that's just what we think about whenever we talk about artificial intelligence. So most definitely, yes, it is a trend because it is here and it's staying. Okay. But now let's really think about, why is artificial intelligence so important to talk about in our classrooms? But there's really two big questions that we have to think about in times of AI. One, how is it going to affect our classrooms? How is it going to affect our students? And two, how is this going to change the instructions that we give our kids? So how is it going to affect our classrooms? Okay, how is it going to change the students and what they're doing? And then two, how is it going to change what we instruct them? So what type of information we are giving them in order to be successful adults? How is that going to change their perspective? Okay. So those are our two big questions that we have to think about. Okay. So let's take that and let's talk about what artificial intelligence can and cannot do, and then we'll kind of answer a few of those questions. So one thing that AI can do, it can shop for you. Okay, you can go on now and you can actually say, hey Siri or hey Alexa, and it will pull up and you can ask it, hey, would you go buy me XYZ? And it'll do it. Okay, another thing that is, that's those powered assistants such as Siri and Alexa. Okay, but the shopping it will also do, this is kind of one of those interesting things that you can use with smart refrigerators now. You can have them take a picture of what's inside your fridge and they will give you recipes that you can create, or it'll tell you what other things you're low on, what you might need. So that's just some practical everyday use. Another thing that AI will do, it can help prevent fraud. So it'll help prevent people from stealing your information and using it in negative ways. Another thing, it will write parent emails for you. I don't know, I can't think of anything scarier than talking to parents. I'm not, when I say that, but I've gotten plenty of experience this year, but writing those parent emails, it will do that for you. It'll also grade papers. You can actually upload papers and student work, and it'll start to grade things for you. I'm not sure exactly to the extent it will do, but if you give it certain parameters, it does actually follow, and artificial intelligence will actually grade some of that student work. Number 6, it will create smart content. What that means, so that is interactive content for your classrooms. So think about it like the Pear Deck that we used, or think about it as Flipgrid, or even other things that we use currently. Now think about that as in a more diverse and more in-depth detail. You can actually take artificial intelligence and implement it into different spheres of your classroom, and it'll allow them to have that more in-depth learning about some of those things. Number 7, it will monitor student data for you. So if you pull up or you upload all of their data and you say, okay, this XYZ, these kids got A, B, C, D, or how many kids they got right. And it'll actually give you some of the things that, how they did, what they did wrong, any of that, and it'll help analyze that student data for you. Last thing that it can do, this is almost a little scary, is that AI can earn a university degree. They actually did a study at the University of Minnesota this year. And one thing they did was for all of the paperwork, all the things that they had to do in order to earn a bachelor's degree, I can't remember what type of degree program, but they were able to, based on the information and based on the paperwork that the AI generated, they could pass every single class. Now, that's not to say that all of their scores were great, because they weren't. They're actually pretty low, but it was high enough that they were able to pass, and they were able to earn a university degree. So we'll go back to that here in a minute and think about how that really changes our instructions and how that changes our college programs. But really, let's talk next about what it can't do. So what AI cannot do, it doesn't have common sense, and that's because it is a computer program. It is not creative. So anything that requires a student to be creative and to think critically about anything, or anything that requires it to emotionally think, okay, AI cannot do. Okay, it's also anything that requires it to be intuitive or to have prior knowledge. So any of that or understanding context, it cannot do. Okay, now it can take your paper and it can write it for you, but it can't infuse into that the creativity. It can't infuse into that the emotional concepts that go with it, and it can't require any intuition or prior knowledge to be put into that. So that's what it can't do. Yeah. Let's see, next slide. Okay, but one of those things, again, another graphic that shows us just some more advantages of what artificial intelligence will do. Okay, it gives you a lot of assistance on digital platforms. So think about whenever you go online and you're trying to solve something. I know I was trying to reset a password for my dad, and that for the life of me, I could not get a real person on the phone. And so I had to keep texting some artificial intelligence, which was driving me crazy, but it worked. And that's one example of where you would see it. Okay, it has risk-taking capabilities. It's available 24/7. So at any time of the day, any time of night, you can use this. Okay, there's less human error. So that idea of, this got filed wrong because, Becky was asleep at her desk, that's not going to happen as much. Okay, and it's also unbiased. We're now seeing some HR or human resources groups help weed through some applications using artificial intelligence in order to, based on certain criteria, to help them get the type of people that they're looking for. So this is just, again, some ideas of what artificial intelligence is doing and how we can see it. Okay, now let's talk about classrooms, because we talked about how is it going to change our kids, and we asked ourselves, how is it going to change the instructions? Well, for one, how is it going to change our kids? One thing that I've looked at and I've read is that one of the bigger things that they say is that lack of motivation. First off, our kids are already not motivated. They haven't been motivated since COVID. And so let's think about, whenever we think about our artificial intelligence, that's probably going to just increase that lack of motivation even more, because now that they know they have something that can write a paper for them, what's going to be the incentive for them to write that 10-page paper? There's not going to be a lot of it. So now we have to really think about and think creatively, okay, how we can change that motivation and really intrinsically and really get into their heart of hearts and actually find out what truly motivates them. What can we do to get students to motivate into work? But another thing that I did read that was very interesting, okay, especially in math class, I always encourage my students to ask questions, okay? And so one of the things that I read about and that said was, well, if we have artificial intelligence, that's low stakes for students to ask questions. If I'm standing up at the front of the room and asking, hey, are there any questions? Typically, I maybe get one or two of my extroverted kids to ask a question. But what happens is as soon as I release my students to go to work, all of a sudden, all their hands are raised because they're waiting until we're not in front of the entire classroom and we're not doing everything as a group in order to ask those questions, because either A, they're shy, or B, they just don't want to be in front of that entire class. And so because of that, artificial intelligence, one thing that it might do is it might actually lower the high stakes of asking questions in the middle of class, and actually give students the opportunity to maybe ask those questions with someone who is unbiased, is not going to judge them. Not saying that I judge my students. I'd like to clarify that really quick. But, that might not judge them about what they're asking. And will also give them a pretty clear and concise, hopefully, answer. Because I did notice this, you can manipulate, I was reading about this as well, you can actually manipulate artificial intelligence, at least until it gets you a wrong answer. And so that was kind of interesting. But one thing that we talk about artificial intelligence, so that's one way that you can use it. Another way that you can use it is I typically actually, whenever I've used ChatGPT in the past, I have used it to write math problems. I've used it to help me, think about goals for maybe an IEP. So you can also do it for multiple different ideas, just thinking about those lines. But you can also think about, okay, our second question here is, what about English class? So I'm just gonna show you this really quick because it honestly is a little scary. If I pull up ChatGPT and I start writing, this is what we were writing earlier because we were curious, what happens whenever I ask this? Okay, write me a paper, if I can spell it correctly today, write me a paper about, let's say, Frankenstein, because most of us read that when we were in high school, about Frankenstein at let's say, I read mine when I was a sophomore, so at a 10th grade reading level. Okay, let's see how long it takes for them to do that for me. Okay, it's 4:14. Let's see. Okay, is it done? Nope, it's still going. Okay. In less than a minute, it was able to write me a paper at a 10th grade level about Frankenstein. So that really, when we think about that, how is that going to change English class? Because most of us, going back to our high school years, can remember having to write papers about books, having to write papers about anything, okay? And so whenever we see this, what are we going to do about it? How is English going to respond to this? And I was actually talking to my fiance about this, and we were thinking, what about, instead of worrying so much about, how they're going to be able to write these papers and how they're going to prevent cheating, what are we actually going to require of students? So the level of mastery is what we have to think about here. Do we want students to be able to write a 5-page paper anymore about Frankenstein? Maybe not. Maybe we want students to be able to analyze the emotions of Frankenstein and write it in maybe a paragraph, or even just brainstorm and talk with their friends, or do a presentation about Frankenstein. How are we going to determine that? And we're going to have to get really creative about that level of mastery. Rather than think about, okay, their mastery is going to be, okay, this 5-page paper, can they do that? Maybe we just have to really change that and think about how we might change it from the 5-page paper to maybe the presentation. Maybe you write a paragraph. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, what is important? What is the biggest thing that we need kids to be able to do? And so that's really what we have to start evaluating. It's not just that we want them to be able to write a paper anymore. We want them to think critically and be able to evaluate what's going on. Okay. So one thing that we did, when we talk about artificial intelligence, and I went ahead and showed you the AI, but what I found was this is one way to help you think about how you might write a prompt to put into the AI system. So it goes for prep. So the first P is prompt. Give it very clear and very specific. Write a paper. If I want it to be longer, I would say, okay, write a paper that is 500 words, okay, about Frankenstein, okay? So R, reference context and information. So write a 500-word paper about Frankenstein, okay, and let's say, and his relationship with the doctor, okay? And then E, encourage open-ended responses. Don't be so specific that it is only going to give you one answer, okay? You want it to be open-ended, so that way it'll give you something else. And then P, personalize it, okay? So make sure whenever you're doing this, whenever I was doing whenever I was doing my discussion board, someone said they were writing haikus with this. Okay, and when they were doing that, they said, okay, write me a haiku about for a second grade reading level, okay? And whenever you're doing this, my student likes to swim, my student likes to fish. And that way, that makes it a little bit more personal, and so that way they can do this. So let's see, one way that I have used, again, let's try this. Okay, we're gonna try it again. When I use this, I have it write me word problems. So write a 7th grade math word problem, okay, that uses integer operations. Okay, I want to be more specific, using negative, integer, let's see, addition. Okay. And whenever I do this, okay, it's going to give me, okay, it'll give me the problem. It'll also show you my solution all the way. So whenever we do this, we're specific. Okay, so we ask a very specific prompt. It tells them exactly what I want. It references information that they need to know, like I want it to use negative integers and I want it to be addition. Okay, it also, let's see, okay, it encourages open-ended responses. I'm not making it so specific that they can't choose what they want this problem to be about. So it's about Sarah borrowing money. Okay, I didn't make it any more specific than that. Then personalizing it, just asking you, I could have changed this just a little bit to say, okay, I want this to be about football. Okay, anything along those lines, okay, would have worked. But that's kind of, right there. Okay. Let's see. So that's kind of my advice whenever you go to write prompts and you talk about artificial intelligence. Okay, last thing, how I feel about the whole shebang. Okay, I have really mixed feelings about artificial intelligence, mainly because I know it's already here. There's really nothing I can do about it at this point. And at first, I'll be honest, I was really against the idea. It felt like cheating. It still kind of does a little bit, but that's also like my type A firstborn child syndrome that comes into play here. I think, anything that where I haven't done it completely by myself is cheating, even though I know that's not true anymore. But, and I'm starting to think, is it really cheating when I ask it to write me a word problem? No, because it's not, I'm not using this for credit or for doing anything for, for school. So anyways, but that's kind of what my mind first went to whenever I started thinking about ChatGPT. Is this cheating? Is this really an idea of, how can I use this? Okay, because I really didn't like it at first. But now that I've explored it, it's so much easier whenever I kind of just accepted the fact it's here. And, using it for specific purposes and using it and thinking about it in new and different ways has really opened my mind about how my students could use it to help themselves. Because really, as much as I would love for my students to ask me questions, if they're scared to do so, I want them to ask something that is going to answer it accurately. Maybe not cousin Joe that's sitting across the room and doesn't know how to multiply, let alone multiply negative numbers. Okay, but maybe if they go and ask the AI very specific questions, that might help them understand things. Now whenever we have that problem, I'd much rather my students have that help in some form. So I'm not necessarily opposed to that part. Now I do think that it is really going to change how we view education and how we view our students. Mainly because we have to ask our questions. What is going to be our level of mastery? What are we going to expect of our students anymore? And how on earth are we going to change things so that way our students can actually learn? Okay, so thank you so much.